4 days. Just 4 days can change a person forever, can turn an ordinary girl into an outcast that nobody believes. 25 years old, her whole life ahead of her, and suddenly, a blackout. 4 days of memory erased like chalk from a blackboard. And when the memory returns, you realize it would have been better if it never came back. Because what you saw there, on that ship, among those beings, it's knowledge that destroys your life. This is the story of Samantha Wells, a story you'll consider madness, but every word here is true. The summer of '78 was unbearably hot. Milford, a small town in Ohio, was suffocating from the humid heat. On July 23rd, Samantha Wells woke up with the thought that she needed to buy milk. A simple thought, mundane, the very thought that would change her entire life. At 3 in the afternoon, she got on her blue Schwinn bicycle and rode to the store, through the woods. Everyone in town rode through the woods. It cut the trip by a good 20 minutes. A narrow path, worn by years of use, wound between old oaks and maples. Sunlight broke through the foliage in golden rays. Birds sang. Everything was normal. Samantha pedaled, thinking about the evening. Mark had promised to stop by after work. Maybe they'd catch a new movie at the theater on Main Street. Ordinary plans of an ordinary girl. She worked at the town library, loved reading science fiction, and dreamed of someday going to New York. 25 years old, and life seemed simple and straightforward. The bicycle rolled along the path, and suddenly, silence. Complete, absolute silence. The birds stopped. The wind ceased. Even the rustling of leaves disappeared, as if the world had pressed pause. Samantha slowed down, looking around. Something was wrong. The air became thick, dense, pressing on her eardrums. And then she saw the glow. Between the trees to the right, a strange bluish light pulsed. Not bright, but noticeable even in daylight. The light moved, shifted, as if alive. Samantha stopped, putting her foot on the ground. She should leave. Every cell in her body screamed, "Go, pedal, run!" But she stood there, as if paralyzed. The light grew brighter, approached. Samantha tried to turn the handlebars, but her hands wouldn't obey. The bicycle suddenly became incredibly heavy, as if it weighed a ton. She pushed it, but it didn't budge. The air around her thickened even more, became viscous like molasses. And then she saw it, the object. It hung above the trees about 30 yards from her, huge, metallic, completely silent. The shape was strange, not quite round, more elliptical, with some protrusions along the edges. Light emanated from below, from the center, pulsating, hypnotizing. Samantha opened her mouth to scream, but there was no sound, her throat constricted. The light became blindingly bright, filled all her vision. The whole world turned into solid white radiance. The last thing she remembered, a sensation of lightness, as if her body had become weightless, as if she was falling upward, not down. And then, darkness. They found her bicycle 4 days later, 15 miles from that spot, dented, mangled, but without a single trace of collision with anything, as if giant hands had simply crushed it and dropped it from a height. Samantha was nowhere to be found.
Cold. The first thing Samantha felt was piercing cold, penetrating to the bone. She was lying on something hard and uneven. Gravel? Asphalt? Her eyes wouldn't open. Her eyelids were heavy as lead. Her whole body ached as if she'd run a marathon or hadn't slept for several days. Sound. Somewhere far away, an engine hummed, getting closer. A truck? Samantha forced herself to open her eyes. Bright light struck her pupils, and she groaned, covering her face with her hand. Sky. Blue sky with sparse clouds. The sun was low. Dawn or dusk? She was lying on the shoulder of a highway. Around her, fields, sparse trees, a road sign 50 yards away. Where was she? How did she get here? The last memory, the woods, the bicycle, the strange light, and now this. The truck braked next to her, raising a cloud of dust. A man in his 50s jumped out of the cab, wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. His face expressed a mixture of surprise and concern. "Hey, miss, are you all right? What happened?" Samantha tried to stand, but her legs gave out. The man caught her by the arm. His voice seemed distant, as if coming through thick glass. Samantha looked at her hands. The clothes, the same ones she'd worn riding to the store. T-shirt, denim shorts, but clean, strangely clean, as if just washed. I don't know. Where am I?" "Highway 68, about 10 miles from Cedar Springs. Did someone drop you off here? An accident?" Cedar Springs? That was 50 miles from Milford. How could she have ended up here? Samantha looked at the watch on her wrist, old, still her grandmother's, mechanical. 7 in the morning, July 27th. 27th? She'd left home on the 23rd in the afternoon. 4 days had passed. 4 days had simply vanished. "I need to get to the police. Please, take me to the police." The driver, who introduced himself as John, remained silent the whole way to the nearest town, only occasionally glancing at her with concern. Samantha stared out the window, trying to remember anything. A blank, an absolute blank in her memory. 4 days of life completely erased. At the station, she was met by Sheriff Danny Collins, a portly man with a kind face and tired eyes. He sat her down in his office, poured water, and Samantha began to tell her story. The bicycle, the woods, the strange light, and then nothing. She wakes up on the side of the road 50 miles from home. The sheriff listened, took notes, but Samantha saw doubt in his eyes. He asked about drugs, about alcohol, about arguments with her boyfriend. All the standard questions for cases when a young woman disappears for several days. Samantha denied everything, but felt he didn't believe her.
When she raised her hand to drink water, the sheriff suddenly leaned closer, his gaze fixed on her wrist. On the inside of her left arm, just above the wrist, was a mark, perfectly circular, the size of a quarter. The skin there was slightly pinkish, like the trace of a burn, but without blisters, without scars, just a perfect circle. Where did that come from? Samantha looked at the mark and froze. She didn't remember having such a mark, ever. She ran her finger over the skin, smooth, slightly warm to the touch. A second identical mark was on her right arm, 2 perfect circles. "I don't know. They weren't there before. I know for sure." Her parents arrived 2 hours later. Her mother cried when she saw Samantha. Her father hugged her silently, but his jaw was tightly clenched. Robert Wells, a Vietnam War veteran, a man of facts and logic, wasn't used to things that couldn't be explained, and his daughter's disappearance for 4 days was something that demanded explanations. All the way home, her mother, Eleanor, held Samantha's hand and prayed in a whisper. Her father drove, staring straight ahead, asking short questions. "Do you remember where you went?" "No." "Do you remember the people who took you?" "Nobody took me." "Then how did you end up 50 miles from home?" "I don't know, Dad. I swear, I don't know." At home, everything was the same as 4 days ago. Her room, books on the shelf, the bed made, as if time had stopped. But Samantha knew time hadn't stopped. 4 days had passed, she just didn't remember them. The first night, the nightmares began. Not quite nightmares, fragments, flashes of images. Metal walls, curved, without corners. Bright light striking right into her eyes, but not blinding. A sensation of floating. And faces, not human faces. Samantha woke up in cold sweat, 3 in the morning. Her mother ran into the room. "You were screaming! Dear God, you were screaming as if someone was killing you! What were you dreaming about?" But Samantha couldn't answer. The images slipped away, dissolved as soon as she tried to hold on to them. Only the sensation remained. Horror mixed with something else. Curiosity? Impossible. Who could feel curiosity in such a situation? In the morning, her parents took her to Dr. Harrison, the family physician who had treated them all their lives. The old man in glasses and a white coat examined Samantha with professional thoroughness. Blood pressure normal, pulse steady, pupils react to light, no signs of physical violence, no traces of drugs in the blood. But these marks, he turned her arm in the light, unusual, like a burn, but the edges are too even, as if made with a high-precision instrument. "We could do a biopsy, but I don't think we'll find anything dangerous."
He felt her arms, neck, stomach, and suddenly stopped. Under the skin of her left arm, just above the elbow, there was a small lump, hard, the size of a pea. Dr. Harrison frowned. "When did this appear?" Samantha shook her head. "I don't know. It wasn't there before." The doctor took blood for analysis, did an X-ray. On the image, the lump looked like a small shadow, dense but without clear boundaries. Possibly a lipoma, a benign fatty tumor, but they usually appear slowly, over years, not in 4 days. The blood test showed something strange. All indicators were normal, but the content of some trace elements was slightly elevated. Manganese, copper, some rare isotopes. The doctor couldn't explain it, but assured her it wasn't dangerous to her health. "Maybe you came into contact with some chemicals? Worked with something unusual?" "No, I work in a library. Books, cards, nothing else." That evening at dinner, her father finally asked the question everyone was afraid to voice. "Samantha, what really happened? You can tell us. If someone harmed you, if it was someone you knew, you have to say. We won't judge." Samantha stared at her plate of untouched food. "How to explain what you don't understand yourself? I'm telling the truth, Dad. I remember the woods, the light, and then nothing. 4 days. Emptiness." Her mother quietly cried. Her father clenched his fists, and Samantha felt something in her had changed, something deep inside, as if part of her remained there, wherever she'd been those 4 days, and that part was slowly returning. The memories came in fragments, like a broken mirror someone was trying to piece together. Every night, Samantha awoke with a new piece of the puzzle, and each piece was so incredible that she began to doubt her own sanity. On the 3rd night after her return, she saw the room. Not in a dream. The memory was too vivid, too detailed for a dream. A round room with curved walls that glowed from within with a soft bluish light. No corners, no seams, as if the entire room had been cast from a single piece of material. Smooth, cold in appearance, but when she touched the wall with her palm, warm. In the center of the room was a table, also without corners, smoothly rising from the floor. On the table she lay, not tied, not held by force, but unable to move. Paralysis? No, not quite. Rather, complete relaxation of muscles. There wasn't even fear. There should have been terror, panic, but instead strange calm. And they stood around. 3 of them, maybe 4. It was hard to count. Their movements were smooth, silent. They seemed to glide rather than walk. About 4 feet tall, maybe a little taller. Thin, incredibly thin. Limbs seemed too long for the body. Gray skin, smooth, without hair, without visible pores. But the eyes, good Lord, the eyes, huge, almond-shaped, black, completely black, without whites, without pupils, just bottomless darkness in which her own face reflected. And when they looked at her, Samantha felt they saw not just her body, they saw through her, looked into her thoughts, into her memory,
into her soul.
One of them leaned closer. Long fingers, there were 4 on each hand, touched her forehead. The touch was cool but not unpleasant, and suddenly a voice sounded in Samantha's head. Not words, thoughts, images, sensations, a message without language. Don't be afraid. We won't cause harm. This is necessary. Samantha sat up in bed, gasping. Her hand instinctively reached for her forehead. There, where the being had touched her, the skin was warm. She turned on the light, took out the journal she'd started keeping, and wrote down everything she remembered, every detail, every sensation. Her handwriting trembled, but she wrote until the memory began to fade like a photograph in the sun. By morning, she'd written 5 pages. Reading them in daylight, Samantha realized, this sounds like the ravings of a madwoman. Aliens, abduction, telepathy. If she showed this to anyone, they'd send her to a psychiatrist. But it was real. She knew it was real. At breakfast, her mother asked how she slept. Fine, Samantha lied. Her father read the newspaper without looking up. They were afraid to ask more, afraid to hear what they didn't want to know, and Samantha was afraid to speak. But the silence was becoming unbearable. After breakfast, she drove to Jennifer's, her best friend since childhood. If anyone could listen to her without judgment, it was Jen. They sat in Jennifer's backyard, drinking iced tea, and Samantha told her story, slowly, carefully choosing words. Jennifer listened silently, her face gradually paling. When Samantha got to the description of the beings, their huge eyes, Jennifer set down her glass. Sam, do you understand how this sounds? Do you understand what you're telling me? I know how it sounds, but it was real. I swear, Jen, it was real. Jennifer stood up, paced around the yard. Maybe you need to talk to someone, a professional. Sometimes trauma, stress, they can create false memories. I've read about it. The brain tries to fill gaps in memory, and it creates stories that seem real. These aren't false memories. I remember the smell, metal and something else, something chemical. I remember the cold of the table. I remember their touch. Jennifer looked at her with pity, and Samantha understood. Even her best friend didn't believe her. Of course she didn't believe. How could you believe such a thing? Aliens exist only in books and movies, not in the real life of a small Ohio town. Samantha left, feeling even more alone than before. At home, she locked herself in her room and opened the journal again. She wrote until evening, recording every new fragment of memory. The instruments they used, silvery, curved, of unknown purpose. The sounds, a low hum penetrating her entire body. The sensation of time, there was none. Seconds stretched to infinity or flew by in an instant. And one more memory. One of them was different, smaller than the others, movements more cautious. He looked at her differently, if you could speak of the gaze of beings without pupils. In his thoughts, which touched her consciousness, there was something like regret. Sorry, this is necessary for the future.
What future? Whose future? But there was no answer. A week later, Samantha tried to return to work. The library greeted her with silence, not that cozy silence of bookshelves she was used to, but tense, full of unspoken questions. Mrs. Palmer, the library director, hugged her upon meeting, but her look was guarded. "How are you feeling, dear? We were so worried. The police said you got lost for a few days." "Yes, something like that. Memory lapse. Doctors say everything's normal." "Thank God. We prayed for you." But behind Samantha's back, whispers began. She heard fragments of conversations. "They say they found her in another county, clothes clean, not a scratch. Strange, right? And I heard she's dating that guy from the auto shop. Maybe they had a fight, she left, and now she's embarrassed to admit it. Or drugs. Did you see those circles under her eyes?" Every glance was an accusation, every silence doubt. By lunchtime, Samantha realized she couldn't take it.
She took her things and left early, promising Mrs. Palmer she'd come in tomorrow when she felt better. A lie. She didn't know when she'd feel better. Mark called in the evening. His voice was strained, formal. "We need to talk, Sam. Can I come over?" He arrived half an hour later. They sat in the living room, her parents tactfully retreating upstairs. Mark couldn't look her in the eye. His fingers fidgeted with the edge of his shirt, a habitual gesture when he was nervous. "I don't know how to say this. I've been thinking a lot these days, and I can't continue. Us." Samantha expected this, but the words still cut like a knife. "Why?" "Because you're lying to me, to the whole town. 4 days, Sam. You disappeared for 4 days, and then came back with some crazy story about a memory lapse. You think I'm an idiot? I know when a woman cheats. My father went through this with my mother. I've seen all the signs." "I didn't cheat on you. I swear, Mark, I would never." "Then where were you? Tell me the truth. For once, be honest." Samantha looked at him, at the man she'd spent 2 years with whom she'd planned a future, and realized he couldn't accept the truth. Nobody could. "I'm telling you the truth. I don't remember." Mark stood up. His face was stone. "Then we have nothing to talk about. I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me. I'm sorry, Sam. Take care." The door closed behind him quietly, but that sound thundered in Samantha's ears like a gunshot. She sat on the couch, hugging her knees, and only then allowed herself to cry. Not because of Mark. She understood they wouldn't have survived this test anyway, but because for the first time in a week she realized the scale of what she'd lost. Life. Simple, ordinary life that would never return.
The following Sunday, her mother convinced her to go to church. Samantha wasn't religious, but her mother asked so pleadingly, with such hope in her eyes, that refusing was impossible. Maybe prayer really would help. Maybe God would give answers that people couldn't. Father Thomas, the priest of their parish, conducted the service as usual. After Mass, he called Samantha over, a tall, gray-haired man with a kind face and penetrating eyes. "Your mother spoke to me about your ordeal." Samantha was silent, not knowing what to say. Father Thomas took her hand. "My child, sometimes the devil tempts us with visions, false memories. He wants to lead us astray from the true path. What you experienced, trauma, stress, it made you vulnerable. You must pray, ask the Lord for healing, and these demonic images will go away." "These aren't demonic images." The priest frowned. "Then what are they? You believe in aliens, in flying saucers? That's foolishness, childish fantasies. The world belongs to God and man. There's no one else here." Samantha pulled her hand away. "How do you know everything about God's creation? Maybe we're not the only ones. Maybe there are others." Father Thomas shook his head. "Pray, child, pray and repent. Your soul is in danger if you continue to hold on to these fantasies." Samantha turned and left the church without waiting for her parents. She walked down the street, and every passer-by seemed alien. The town where she'd lived her whole life had become hostile. Whispers, sidewise glances, pointing fingers. "That's the girl. Heard? Says she was abducted by aliens. Completely lost it, poor thing." By evening, rumors reached her that she'd been fired from the library. Mrs. Palmer didn't even call herself, sent a letter. "Considering your current state of health, we believe it's best that you take an extended leave for recovery. We'll find a temporary replacement." Samantha tore up the letter. Everything was crumbling. Job, relationships, reputation. 2 weeks after her return, she'd become an outcast in her own town. If no one believed her, she'd find proof.
Samantha spent a whole day in the library before she was finally fired. She searched for everything she could find about UFOs, about abductions, about contacts, old newspaper clippings, magazines, rare books on distant shelves where no one had looked in years. The history was longer than she thought. Cases of sightings of flying objects dated back dozens of years. Roswell, New Mexico, 47, the crash of something the military called a weather balloon. Project Blue Book, an official U.S. Air Force investigation, closed in 69 with the conclusion that UFOs posed no threat and were not of extraterrestrial origin. But there were other stories. People who claimed they'd been abducted. Betty and Barney Hill, 61. Their story was frighteningly similar to what Samantha experienced. A highway trip, strange light, missing time, memories under hypnosis, beings with large eyes, medical procedures, released without explanation.
Travis Walton, 75, disappeared for 5 days after his friends saw him approach a strange object in the woods. Returned with fragmentary memories of beings and a ship, passed a polygraph, told the truth. Dozens, hundreds of similar cases. Not all were published in major newspapers. Most were in small local publications, in paranormal magazines. But they were all there. People from all over the country with similar stories. All of them faced the same disbelief, the same ridicule. Samantha copied down the addresses of several article authors, amateur ufologists who conducted research. One of them lived relatively close, Robert Chase from Columbus, 2 hours' drive from Milford. She found his number in the phone book and called, expecting to hear the voice of a madman or a charlatan. Instead, a calm, educated male voice answered. Robert Chase listened. "I know how you feel. I've talked to dozens of people who've experienced something similar. You're not alone, and you're not crazy. We can meet tomorrow if you want. I'll come to you." Robert arrived the next day, a man in his 40s, wearing glasses, with the calm manner of a university professor. He worked as an engineer at an aerospace company, but UFOs had been his passion since childhood. He brought a case with folders, photographs, recordings of testimonies from other witnesses. They sat in a cafe on the outskirts of town where no one knew Samantha, and she told her story. Robert recorded everything on a tape recorder, occasionally asking clarifying questions. What color was the light? Did you feel vibration? Did the beings communicate with words or somehow else? How many fingers did you count on their hands? Samantha answered everything, surprised at how seriously he took her words. No smiles, no skepticism, just attention and respect. Your story fits the classic abduction pattern. The beings you describe are known as grays. This is the most commonly encountered type. Medical procedures, telepathic communication, absence of aggression, all of this is typical. But there's a detail that intrigues me. You mentioned that one of them seemed different. Yes, shorter in stature, movements more cautious, and his thoughts were kinder. I know it sounds silly. Not at all. Some researchers believe there may be a hierarchy among them, or different types. Perhaps the one you described was less experienced or more empathetic. Robert took out photographs from his case. These are drawings made by other abductees. Look at them. See if they're similar to what you saw. Samantha looked at the images and felt her blood run cold. The beings in the drawings were exactly like those in her memories. Large almond-shaped eyes, gray skin, long fingers. Every detail matched. But these drawings were made by people who had never met each other, lived in different states, experienced abductions in different years. How is this possible? How could we all see the same thing if it's made up?
Exactly. This is one of the most convincing arguments in favor of the reality of the phenomenon. Consistency of testimonies, even in the smallest details. Robert suggested conducting hypnotic regression. Sometimes, under hypnosis, memory becomes clearer, details surface.
Samantha agreed, although the idea scared her. What if she remembered something she didn't want to know? The session was held a week later at Robert's house. He was trained in the basics of hypnotherapy, although he wasn't a professional. Samantha lay on the couch. Robert spoke in a soft, monotone voice, making her relax, sink into a trance. Return to that day. You're riding your bicycle through the woods. What do you see? And the memory flooded in. Not fragments, a complete sequence of events. The light pulls her inside the ship, a sensation of levitation, a round room, a table, beings around her, instruments scanning her body with beams of light. One of them, the smaller one, that same kind one, touches her forehead. And she sees, not with eyes, with consciousness, flashes of images, stars, planets, interstellar space, a map, a star map with dozens of systems, lines connecting them. Their home? Where they came from? One of the small lights on the map pulses brighter, perhaps an indication of Earth. And words without words, thoughts penetrating her consciousness. A warning, danger, the future of humanity is under threat. They're trying to help, to study, to understand, but time is limited. Changes will come. People must be ready. Samantha opened her eyes, covered in tears. Robert handed her a glass of water. "What did you see?" She told him, stumbling over words. Robert wrote, his hands slightly trembling. "This is incredible. A warning about the future. This is extremely rare in abduction cases. Usually they're silent about their goals. And the star map. Can you draw what you remember?" Samantha took paper and began to draw. Circles, lines, patterns. Her hand moved almost by itself, as if the memory was recorded in her muscles. When she finished, Robert took the drawing and looked at it for a long time, comparing it with some of his notes. "This is similar to the map that Betty Hill drew, very similar. Some researchers have tried to identify these star systems. One theory points to Zeta Reticuli." "Where's that?" "A star 39 light-years from us, a binary system. But this is just a theory." Samantha looked at her drawing and understood. This was real. All of this was real. And now she had an ally, a person who believed. The lump under her skin didn't disappear. On the contrary, it grew. In 2 weeks, it doubled in size, became the size of a cherry pit. Samantha felt it every time she moved her arm. Not pain, just the presence of something foreign in her body.
Robert insisted she have it removed. If it's an implant, as I suspect, it needs to be studied. This could be the first physical evidence. Samantha was afraid. What if it's dangerous? What if removal harms her? But living with it was unbearable. Every night she woke from the sensation that it was moving, although she knew this was impossible. Finding a surgeon willing to perform the operation without too many questions proved difficult. Most required a doctor's referral, a complete examination, but Robert knew someone, Dr. Mills, an old acquaintance who was interested in UFOs and willing to help unofficially. The operation was performed in a small private clinic on the outskirts of Columbus. Local anesthesia, 20 minutes, and Dr. Mills held in forceps a tiny object covered in a thin biological membrane. He washed it, placed it under a microscope, and his face changed. "What is it?" Samantha asked, trying to get up from the table. I've never seen anything like it. This isn't biological tissue. Metal. But the structure." Robert approached the microscope and looked. The object was the size of a grain of rice, silvery, with a perfectly smooth surface. Under magnification, microscopic patterns were visible, as if engraved with incredible precision. Not random patterns, organized, symmetrical. "We need spectral analysis, determine the composition." Dr. Mills packed the object in a sterile container. "I have a friend at the university who can conduct an analysis unofficially, but it will take time." Samantha stared at the container where lay the tiny piece of metal that had been part of her body for 2 weeks. What is it? A tracker? A recording device? Something medical? Why did they leave it in her? The next 2 weeks dragged on painfully slow. The wound healed quickly, almost without a scar, but Samantha felt emptiness where the lump had been, as if part of her had been cut out along with the object, a strange, inexplicable loss. Robert called late in the evening. His voice trembled with excitement. The results came in. Samantha, you have to hear this. I'll come tomorrow morning, but I can't wait. The metal, it's an alloy. Titanium, niobium, rare earth elements. But the ratio, it's impossible. Such an alloy can't be created with modern technology. The temperatures, pressure required, we simply can't achieve it. What are you saying? The isotopic analysis showed something even stranger. The isotopes of some elements have a composition that isn't found on Earth. They're either created artificially under conditions unavailable to us, or they're of extraterrestrial origin. Samantha slowly sank into a chair. Proof. Physical, scientific proof. Not memories, not stories. A real object that couldn't be explained by earthly technology. We should make this public, send it to major laboratories, to the media. This will change everything.
Robert was silent for several seconds. Samantha, I want you to be careful. If we make this public, the consequences could be unpredictable. There are people who don't want this information to become public. I don't want to scare you, but cases where witnesses with evidence disappeared or were forced to keep quiet, they're not rare. What are you talking about? The government? I don't know exactly. Maybe the government, maybe private structures, but too many coincidences to be random. Samantha didn't know whether to believe conspiracy theories, but the object was real, the analysis was real, and if Robert was right, her life could be in danger. What should I do? Nothing for now. Give me time. I'll contact several trusted people. We'll make copies of all the data, distribute them. If something happens to one of us, the information will still get out. It's the only way to protect ourselves. The next day, Robert arrived with a suitcase full of documents. They spent the whole day making copies, recording everything on cassette tapes, photographing the object from different angles. Robert sent packages to several colleagues in different states. Insurance, he explained. If something happens to us, they know what to do. In the evening, when Robert left, Samantha noticed a car parked across from the house. A black sedan, tinted windows, no license plates. Her heart beat faster. She closed the curtains and called Robert. There's a strange car by my house. I'm scared. Stay home. Don't go out. I'll come first thing in the morning. That night, Samantha didn't sleep. The car stood until dawn and then disappeared. But Samantha knew she wasn't paranoid. Someone was watching, and that someone knew about the find. Robert Chase published a small article in the local county newspaper, cautious without loud claims, just a call for people who had experienced unusual events in the Milford area in recent years to contact him for research. He didn't mention Samantha's name, didn't give details of her case, just an invitation to talk. A week later, 3 people responded. The first was Thomas Griffin, a farmer from a town 30 miles from Milford. He was 58 years old, had worked the land his whole life, was a practical and down-to-earth man. But 3 years ago, something happened to him that he hadn't told anyone about, afraid of becoming a laughingstock. They met at Robert's house. Thomas spoke slowly, choosing words carefully, as if each one came with difficulty. November 75. He was checking the livestock late in the evening, heard a strange hum. All the animals fell silent, froze. An object hovered over the field, glowing with a soft orange light. Thomas remembered trying to run to the house, but his legs wouldn't obey.
The next memory, dawn. He was lying in the same field, his clothes wet with dew, but he himself hadn't frozen. The watch on his wrist stopped at 2 in the morning, but it was already 7. 5 hours were gone. His wife found him, called the doctor. The doctor said, overwork, fainting, but Thomas knew it wasn't that. "Do you have marks, traces?" Samantha asked. Thomas rolled up his shirt sleeve. On his forearm was a scar, thin, perfectly straight, about 3 inches long. Appeared the day after that night. Didn't hurt, just was. The doctor said it was an old scar, that I just hadn't noticed it before, but I know my body. This scar wasn't there. The second was Linda Morrison, a nurse at the local hospital. She was 32 years old, married, 2 children. A year ago, in the spring of '77, she was driving home from the night shift. 4 in the morning, the road empty. A light appeared ahead, incredibly bright. The car stalled. Linda tried to start it, but nothing worked. And then she saw the beings. They approached the car, 3, maybe 4, short, thin, huge eyes. Linda tried to scream, but her voice wouldn't work. The car door opened by itself. Their hands touched her, and her whole body went numb. The next memory, she's sitting behind the wheel. The car is running, and it's already dawn. 2 hours had vanished. She had marks like Samantha's, round traces on her wrists, and nightmares. Every night she woke up, remembering fragments, a metallic room, bright light scanning her body, a sensation of being studied like an insect under a microscope. Her husband didn't believe her, said she was overworked, that night shifts were affecting her psyche. Linda stopped talking about it, but the fear didn't pass. She was afraid to drive alone at night, afraid to look at the sky. The third was Danny Hart, a 19-year-old guy who worked at a gas station. His case was different. He wasn't abducted himself, but he saw his friend being taken. Summer of '76, Danny and his friend Kevin were in the woods, camping with a tent. Around midnight, they heard a hum, saw light through the trees. Kevin went out to look, said it might be a helicopter. Danny stayed by the tent. He heard Kevin scream, ran out and saw his friend being pulled by a beam of light into an object above the trees. Danny ran to the car, rushed to town, called the police. They searched for Kevin for 3 days, found him 10 miles from the camp, unconscious but alive. Kevin didn't remember anything. Doctors said concussion, amnesia. But when Danny tried to tell the police what he saw, they didn't believe him. Said teenagers, alcohol, hallucinations. Kevin denied everything, said he just got lost, fell, hit his head. Their friendship didn't survive. Kevin moved to another state a year later. They never spoke again. But Danny remembered. He saw. 4 witnesses sat in Robert's living room, and each told their story. The details were different, but the pattern was the same. Strange objects, missing time, beings with large eyes, disbelief of those around them. They had all lived with their secrets for years, afraid to speak, afraid of judgment.
For the first time in months, Samantha felt relief. She wasn't alone, wasn't crazy. This was happening to others in the same area for years. Something was here, in these woods, in this sky. Something was studying people, taking them, returning them. Why? Robert suggested creating a support group. Meet once a week, share memories, help each other cope with the trauma. Everyone agreed. For the first time, each of them could speak the truth without fear of mockery. At the second meeting, Thomas asked what everyone was thinking. Why us? What is it about us that makes them choose us? Robert shook his head. Perhaps it's random, or there's a pattern we don't understand. Some researchers believe they track certain families, generations, but there's no proof. Linda added quietly, "My mother once told me a strange story. When she was 20, she saw a strange light above the house. At the time, it didn't seem important, but now I'm thinking..."
Samantha remembered a conversation with her father many years ago. He mentioned that as a child, he saw something unusual in the sky over the farm where he grew up. A saucer, he called it, laughing. Just a child's dreams. But what if not? A pattern. Perhaps it was a pattern. Something stretching through years, through generations. They weren't random victims. They were chosen. But why? The black sedans began appearing regularly, near Samantha's house, near Robert's house, even near Thomas's farm. Always at a distance, never approaching close, just a presence, silent and threatening. Samantha's phone began making strange sounds, clicks, interference, sometimes distant voices speaking in an incomprehensible language. A technician she called checked the line and said everything was fine, but the sounds continued. Robert became paranoid. He installed an alarm system in his house, got a dog, stopped talking about his research on the phone. Only personal meetings, only in whispers. He told Samantha about the legend of the men in black, mysterious agents who appear after UFO contacts and force witnesses to keep quiet. I thought it was urban legends, jokes, but now too many coincidences. Too many witnesses who, after a visit from such people, recanted their testimony or disappeared. That's insane. We're not in a spy movie. But a week later, Robert's office was broken into. Nothing was stolen, no money, no equipment, but all the folders with documents about abductions disappeared, all interview recordings, and the metal object extracted from Samantha's arm. Everything was gone. Robert called the police, but they threw up their hands. No signs of break-in, locks not damaged. Maybe you moved something yourself and forgot? Robert didn't forget. Someone with professional skills entered his office and took exactly what constituted evidence. Fortunately, there were copies. Robert had sent duplicates to several trusted colleagues in other states in advance. But the loss of the original was a blow. The metal object was the only physical evidence. Now there were only photographs and analysis records, which could easily be disputed. 2 days later, 2 men came to Samantha's home. They knocked on the door in the morning when her parents were at work. Samantha opened the door, saw 2 men in dark suits with expressionless faces. One showed identification, something with the seal of the U.S. Department of Defense. She didn't remember the name. "Miss Wells, we need to talk. May we come in?" "About what?" "About your experiences and about your contacts with Mr. Chase." They entered the living room without waiting for an invitation, sat down, placed a briefcase on the table. One of them, the older one with graying temples, spoke calmly, almost friendly. "Miss Wells, we understand you've experienced a traumatic event. Memory lapse, disorientation, that's serious. But spreading stories about extraterrestrial contact can have consequences. For you, for your family, for public order." "I'm telling the truth." "Truth is subjective. The human brain is capable of creating very convincing false memories, especially under the influence of hypnosis or leading questions. Mr. Chase may be acting with the best intentions, but his methods aren't scientific." "What are you suggesting? That I forget everything?" "We're suggesting you live a normal life, find a job, restore relationships, move forward. Continuing this investigation will only lead to disappointment and more stress, and perhaps to danger." "Is that a threat?" The second man, younger, with cold eyes, leaned forward. "It's not a threat, it's advice, in your best interest. There are things ordinary citizens shouldn't know, not because we want to deceive you, but because this information could be misunderstood, could cause panic." "So it's true? They're real?" The man exchanged glances. The older one closed his briefcase. "Miss Wells, we won't continue this conversation. We just hope you'll take our advice. Live quietly, don't attract attention. That's all we want." They left as suddenly as they appeared. Samantha stood in the middle of the living room, trembling. She understood. The silent confirmation was in their words. They didn't deny the existence of the phenomenon.
They just wanted her to keep quiet. She called Robert, told him about the visit. He was silent for a long time, then sighed heavily. They got to you. This means we're on the right track, but it also means danger. Samantha, I can't force you to continue. If you want to stop, I'll understand.
No, I won't stop. They want us to keep quiet. That means there's something to hide. But the fear was real. Every car passing by the house, every stranger on the street raised suspicion. Samantha began writing down everything she remembered on paper, hiding the notes in different places. If something happened to her, at least there would be a trail. The support group continued to meet, but now cautiously. Different places, different times, no phone calls, only personal messages. They all felt the pressure, invisible but constant. Thomas once said, "Maybe we really should stop. I have a family, a farm. I can't risk all of this for a story no one will believe." Linda nodded. "I'm thinking about it too. The kids ask questions. Why is Mom always at some meetings? My husband is starting to suspect I'm having an affair." But Danny, the youngest of them, said firmly, "If we stop, they win. They want us to be afraid, to keep quiet, but this is our life, our experience. No one has the right to take this from us." Samantha looked at them all. "We can stop, go our separate ways, forget, but the truth will remain the truth, and someday, maybe not in our time, but it will come out." 2 years passed, fall of '80. Samantha moved to Portland, Oregon. New city, new life, new name on documents. She changed her last name, became Samantha Cole. Not because she was forced to, but because she wanted to start over, without the shadow of the past. She got a job at a bookstore, rented a small apartment on the outskirts. Life was quiet, unremarkable. She stopped looking for evidence, stopped insisting that people believe her. But not because she forgot. She simply understood. The world wasn't ready. Robert Chase continued his research, but became more cautious. They corresponded occasionally, encrypted letters, discussing new cases, new evidence, but there were no more public statements. The support group disbanded. Everyone returned to their lives, bearing the burden of knowledge alone. Samantha started a blog under the pseudonym Night Watcher, without details, without locations, just thoughts, support for those who'd experienced something similar, an anonymous corner of the internet where people could tell their stories without fear of judgment. The blog became popular. Hundreds of letters arrived every month, people from all over the world with similar stories. She wasn't alone. None of them were alone. At night, Samantha sometimes woke and went out on the balcony. She looked at the stars above Portland, at the infinite space full of mysteries. She remembered the message she received that day on the ship, remembered it clearly under hypnosis. Humanity isn't alone, but contact will come only when people are ready. Not now, not in 10 years, maybe in a generation or 2. They're watching, studying, waiting until humanity grows up, stops seeing an enemy in everyone who's different, until people learn to look at the stars not as a frontier to be conquered, but as a home they share with other intelligent species. Samantha no longer tried to convince anyone. She knew the truth, and that was enough. Sometimes the truth is too big for the world to accept it all at once. Sometimes it takes time, a lot of time.
A year later, a young woman contacted her through the blog. 22 years old, missing for 3 days. Nobody believes her. The story was painfully familiar. Samantha met with her, listened, supported her. Not with advice to move on and forget, but with understanding and acceptance. You're not crazy. This is real, and you'll get through this. The girl cried with relief, the first person who believed, the first person who understood. Samantha hugged her and realized this was her mission now. Not to prove to the world, not to change the system, just to be there for those who'd gone through the same thing.
to be a beacon in the darkness. She created a small support network, people in different cities who'd experienced contact and were ready to help others. An anonymous network, without official structures, without publicity, just people supporting people. Sometimes Samantha received letters from Robert. He was older, tired, but didn't give up. Once he wrote, "You know, I think we were chosen not just to be studied, we were chosen to remember, to keep the knowledge until humanity grows into it. We're keepers of the secret." Samantha agreed with this. They were witnesses, a bridge between worlds, people who touched something that transcends ordinary reality and survived to tell about it, even if no one listens, even if everyone thinks they're crazy. One night, falling asleep, Samantha felt a strange calm. Not fear, not anger at injustice, not disappointment, just acceptance. She'd lived an ordinary life for 25 years, then 4 days changed everything. And now she lived a different life, full of meaning and purpose. The nightmares passed. The memories remained, but no longer tormented her. They became simply part of her, part of the story that made her who she was, stronger, wiser, more open to the incomprehensible mysteries of the universe. Somewhere out there among the stars, they fly, study, wait, and when humanity is ready, they'll return. Not with war, not with conquest, but with an offer to become part of something greater. A galactic community, an interstellar alliance. Samantha didn't know the details, but she felt the future wouldn't be lonely. And meanwhile, she did what she could, helped those who needed it, kept the memory, and looked at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there in the infinity of space, there were others looking down at the small blue planet and its inhabitants, thinking, soon, soon they'll be ready. Samantha Wells, the girl who rode her bicycle to the store on a sunny July day, no longer existed. She became someone else, a person who knew. And that knowledge, despite all the pain it brought, was a gift of looking behind the veil of the ordinary, touching a mystery that most people would never know. And as she fell asleep that night under the starry Portland sky, her last thought was, "Thank you. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for showing me that the universe is bigger and more amazing than we can imagine. Thank you for making my life extraordinary." Somewhere far away, beyond the atmosphere, perhaps they heard, and perhaps in their alien hearts there was something like satisfaction. Another human understood. Another is ready for the future that will come. Not today, not tomorrow, but one day. Definitely one day.